we're going to talk about another very important question, which is something I get asked about on a daily basis, and namely how to start a software company in 2024. But before getting to the details of starting a software company, let's talk about why you should listen to me. I started building apps all the way back in 2015, which is basically a decade ago. But I learned a lot of lessons the hard way. There was no good resource online that I could follow along and figure out how to start a software company, how to start a mobile app company, just how to make a business out of working with software. My wish and my desire is to help everyone who is just starting out today and hopefully make their journey a little bit easier than what I had to go through myself. So, you're looking to start a software company in 2024. First of all, congratulations, that's a great idea. I think the days when working with software and starting a software company were reserved for the mega nerds or only for people in Silicon Valley are thankfully long gone. Nowadays, everyone can start a software company. And thinking about the types of companies that are out there, there are mainly two. The two main types are, of course, you can either start a product company or you can start a service company. Now, what's the difference between a product company and a service company? For those of you that don't know, a product company is a company that has one main product and some complementary products to that main product as well. Compared to a service company, which usually does not have its own product, but provides software development services for other businesses. That will be a web development company, a mobile app development company, which builds software for other businesses as a service. But first, let's talk about the software product companies. Think about companies like Uber, Facebook, Instagram, Airbnb, Google. These are all product companies. These are not service companies. But most software companies that you've heard of are product companies, which means that they have their own product. Now, why people prefer to start a product company? Now, first of all, it's easier to start because you usually have a good idea of what problem you're trying to solve, who you're trying to solve it for, and exactly how you intend to solve that problem. So looking at the problem in that way, you're better suited to start a product company, which means you build a product which solves a specific problem for a specific set of people in a specific way. This is more or less what starting a product company means. The founders of software product companies are usually either developers or technical people in some way. This doesn't mean that a person who is not a technical founder can start a product company, but it's less likely that they will be successful in a venture like this. The main reason why people start product companies is usually because the anticipated reward at the end of the journey, which is either exiting your company, going public, or liquidating the company in another form, is the reward there is potentially much higher compared to starting a service company. And this is the reason why most people are looking into starting a product company. Starting a product company is also, as I like to call it, sexier. So it's a much preferred way of getting into software compared to building a service company. The potential downsides are that a product company would be usually slower to starting to generate cash flow. There are a lot of big companies out there, even public companies, who are not profitable, meaning companies like Uber, Spotify, and other very big names on the market. Historically, it took them more than 10 years to start making money. Building a product company could require a different mindset. So if you're a more traditionally oriented business person, probably it's better for you to look into starting a service company. Compared to the product company, the service company is much faster to starting to generate cash flow. Basically, you can start generating cash flow from day one. The risk is much lower compared to starting a product company because the service company, there's no big investment that's required to start it. There's no big overhead that you need to have in the company. So potentially it's much easier to scale up and down. And because of that, it's less risky to start a service company. However, looking at the downsides of starting a service company, it's much more difficult to pull off, meaning starting a service company and building a big business out of it is a lot harder than starting a product company and building a big business out of it. It's probably less likely that a product company would succeed in the long run compared to a service company, but scaling a service company is potentially harder because it's difficult to build it right. There's a lot more competition on the market for service-based companies. Anyone can start a service-based business, especially when it comes to development. The pool of talent is basically global, so you can hire from all over the world. You can pick and choose where your developers live, where they work from, and you can also pick and choose where your clientele lives and where the businesses are. So you can build a truly global business as a service company, but this is, again, both positive and a negative because you have all that opportunity, which makes it difficult to stand out in the crowded market, which is already out there. And the last reason why building a service company could be harder than building a product company is that it takes a while to build a portfolio of successful projects. When you're building a product, you don't necessarily need a big portfolio to start, because you can even give your product away for free to some businesses, to some companies to use, or to some end consumers, depending on your product, of course. And you can start building the portfolio this way. So you don't need to make a big investment outside of building the product itself. When it comes to building a service business, it's much more difficult to provide your services for free. Now, of course, if you're starting out and you're just by yourself initially, you're the person providing the services to businesses and to other companies, it's not such an issue. Of course, you can work for free if you decide to do it. But if you already have employees, if you already have an office, if you already have some expenses coming in, it's basically impossible to work for free just to build a portfolio. So it takes a while to do it. Okay, so we discussed the two types of software companies that you can start in 2024 are. Now, in the next section of the video, we're going to be talking about how to actually start a product company and a service company. Now, bear in mind that these topics are super long, so we can't cover everything in detail about every step of the process of how to start a successful business. Some people go to university and study that for, 5, 6, 7 years. So it's very difficult to cover everything in a short video and not losing everybody and just you clicking out and starting to watch something else. But I'm gonna do my best to keep it short in this video. And of course, we're gonna unwrap these topics in our next videos and the next episodes of the show. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss anything. Let's start talking about how to start a software company, and we're gonna start with the product companies. As discussed, a software product company is a company which has either one or multiple products. These products are usually distributed online, either as a web application, desktop application, a mobile application, or some combination of these. For example, let's go back to Airbnb, which is a good example. They started out actually as a mobile app. So Airbnb's first product was a mobile application which allowed people to easily search for short-term rentals worldwide. Eventually, they also built a web version of their application, so they have both a mobile application, which is one part of their product, and they also have a web application, which is another part of their product. So just keep thinking about the fact that software product company has one product or multiple, but let's keep it simple and let's talk about single product companies. So what do you need to start a product company? Most importantly, you need an idea. And when we talk about ideas in software development, we don't necessarily mean like a creative idea, even though that also might be a good idea for a software product. But think about a problem more than you think about an idea. So a problem is a problem that you might have, or this might be a problem that someone might have. Let's say you work in a company and you see a problem that exists for the employees in that company. All of these are valid ideas for a software product, the good ones at least, solve a specific problem for a specific person in a specific way. We talked about that in the beginning. So don't overcomplicate things. You don't have to build the next Facebook. You don't have to build the next Airbnb. Just think about a simple problem and what kind of solution you can build for that problem. Most of the big companies on the market nowadays, not most of them, all of them started out as very simple software products. Facebook, Airbnb, Instagram, all of these big companies that are now on our phones on a daily basis started out as very simple products. Facebook was a web directory of university students. Airbnb was a directory of listings for people that had air mattresses that they could rent out to people visiting San Francisco. Uber was a very simple mobile application which worked in one neighborhood of New York City, and it would only allow you to order one type of car. So the fact that these products 10, 15 years down the line have a lot more functionalities, they have a lot more ways you can use them, this does not matter because all of them started out as simple products. And that's how you need to think about your own company. You need a simple problem that you can find a solution to, and this is your product, this is your idea. Step 2 of the process is you need to perform a very extensive research as to what exists on the market as solutions to the problem you're searching for or the problem you're trying to solve yourself. Most probably someone out there has already thought about the same problem that you're thinking about. It's very unlikely that you're the first person to come up with a solution to a problem or the fact that the problem exists in itself. This happens sometimes, but with the pace of software development in 2024, it's highly unlikely. 10 years ago, that was an issue because 10 years ago, the mindset was if someone has already solved the problem that you're trying to solve, it's already too late. But nowadays, the mindset is actually very different than that. If someone has already solved the problem you're trying to solve, this means that there is market for the product that you're trying to build, okay? So the whole mindset of the industry has shifted towards it's better to have a competitor than to be first. Because the fact that you're first 30 years after people started building software the way that they're doing it now, or let's say in a similar way, usually means that the problem is either not big enough, there's not a market that's big enough, it's too early, it's too late, it's just usually not a good idea. If you find out that there is actually nothing similar to what you're building out there, I would say it's better to look for another problem to solve. With that aside, if there's already other products on the market are similar to what you're trying to build or are solving a similar problem to what you're trying to build, that's actually good news. Now, one caveat to that is if there's actually a big player on the market, so I don't know, if you're trying to build the next search engine, which would allow people to search for results online, meaning you're building a competitor to Google, it might not be the best idea for your first venture. If you're already a seasoned software company founder, it's okay to think about problems like that. But if it's your first time and you're just starting out, just be careful with those big problems where there's actually already a big player on the market solving the same thing that you're solving. So, best case scenario is there's already some competition on the market, which means there are other products on the market doing similar things to you envision your product to do. There's no big player on the market, meaning there's no one more or less monopoly, which covers the whole market. So this is the sweet spot. This is what you want to be looking for during your research phase. And if during the research phase, it turns out that your product or your idea doesn't fall into that sweet spot, I would say it's probably best to start over. It's very easy to come up with ideas, actually. People think that it's difficult, and sometimes when they come up with an idea, they hold onto it for so long and so strong because they feel like it's like their baby. And if they somehow, I don't know, let it go, the world is basically going to collapse. And I'm here to tell you it's not. I have a list of ideas for product companies. I can show it to you in a later video, which is probably now more than 150 ideas long. So coming up with ideas is not the issue. Once you get into the groove, once you know what to look for, it's very easy to come up with an idea. So don't get caught up if you find out that the idea is not the best, okay? You have your idea, you've done your research, and you're ready to move on to the next step. And the next step is called validation. Now, a lot of people go about validating their ideas in a very different way. And they actually, some founders, especially inexperienced founders, they tend to move the validation further away in the future for too long. What you want to do is you want to validate as early as possible. The most seasoned founders, the most seasoned entrepreneurs, what they do is they actually validate before they start building the product. And you might be wondering how that happens. Like I said, this is a very long topic, but I'll try to cover in some detail now, but we're going to cover it in more details in a later video. So validating your idea before you have your product is actually very easy. You need to either draw up a concept. So it could be just a design concept. It could be a sketch. It could be just a PowerPoint presentation. So just something that you can start showing to people who might be the potential users of your product. They're the people with the problem. So you built that little thing, which is not, you haven't started writing code. You haven't started doing anything remotely related to software development. You're just describing your idea and you're telling the story of the bright future which everybody's going to live in once your product is alive. You start talking about that with the potential users of the product. Again, these are the people with the problem that you're trying to solve. And you start gathering feedback. The fact that you have thought about something in your head usually while you're alone, does not mean that this is something that other people would find of value. It might turn out that your idea, which is a good idea, and there is market for it, but your solution might be something that people are not ready for. It could be, they could be looking for something else, something simpler, something more complex, and that's fine. And that's the whole point of trying to validate before you start building. Because imagine it's the first time you're building a building, an actual physical building. You're constructing a building that people are going to live in. But you forget to, and it's the first building of its kind, okay? So this building does not exist, or it does exist in some other places on the planet, but it's not very popular in the way that you're trying to build it, okay? So you build the building, you invest all the time, all the money, all the emotion and everything else into doing it, just to find out that nobody actually wants to buy an apartment in your building because you forgot to ask them, you forgot to show them what it's going to look like. You forgot to ask them, is this something that you actually would like to live in? Is this something that you are willing to purchase if it exists, okay? So it's the same process. You're just trying to tell the story of how the world is going to be better once your product is out there, and you try to understand whether your potential customers actually want that specific product. And that's validation. I suggest you do it early. Some people who are, let's say, more unsure, or it's more difficult to explain to their potential users, their potential customers, what that product is going to be, how the product is going to look like, and how exactly it's going to solve their problems. It might be worthwhile to build a simple concept, but this is more or less an edge case. We can talk about that in one of our future videos in more detail, of course. You have your idea, you've done your research, and you've already validated your idea. So now it's time to actually start into the fun part, which is building your product. And here, and this term is called MVP. MVP, when it comes to software development, means minimum viable product. And the MVP for your product is the minimal version which actually solves the problem for your potential users without all the extra bells and whistles. So every product on the market, aside from its main functionality, of course, has a bunch of other features which actually make up the product. So a product is not just one simple thing that it does, it's a bunch of things rolled into the same product, right? So the MVP is actually just the main feature, or the few main features which are required to be existent in order for you to prove that you can actually solve the problem that you're trying to solve. Okay? So forget about all the bells and whistles, forget about all the optional extras. It's just the main solution to the problem. This is the MVP. This should not take up more than, I don't know, 2-3 weeks to build. And I know this sounds short, but the purpose of the MVP is not to be the actual product that you're going to use 10 years down the line. The purpose of the MVP is to give you the ability to inexpensively actually start testing the market and trying to figure out if this is the product that the market is looking for. So the purpose of the MVP is to be quick, to be cheap, but to be functional. That's probably the three main features of an MVP. So don't overcomplicate it. Don't put in too many things in it. If it takes you more than a month or 2 months to build, then it's probably too much. So keep it simple and just get it out there so that you can actually start collecting real feedback from users. And once you have your MVP out there, you don't just stop with that one version. This is software. Of course, you need to be making updates all the time. You need to be listening to the feedback that your users are giving you so that you can keep improving the product, keep changing the product until you reach the, how to say, you could probably call it the heaven for software entrepreneurs. And this is the moment when you reach product market fit. Now, product market fit is the moment when the market actually starts consuming your product without you having to push any further. This does not mean that you stop your marketing activities. This does not mean that you stop developing the product further. It just means that after many iterations of changing the product into what the market is looking for through listening to feedback and making small changes so that it's closer to what people actually want, this is the moment when people start paying you for the product. This is the moment when people stop complaining about the main functionality of the product. This is the moment that every, like I said, software entrepreneur is dreaming of when they start their software development journey. Because this means that, okay, we now finally have the product. Once you have the product, you move into the next phase. And the next phase is called scaling. Initially, maybe you built your MVP and you reach product market fit with a relatively small portion of the market. You don't go for the whole market, go for the whole world with your MVP until you have product market fit. Once you do, however, it's time to scale. You need to scale the product, you need to scale the team, you need to scale your marketing. Basically, time to grow up, so to speak. This is, let's say, a very important moment in your journey as a software company founder. Not a lot of people get there, to be honest. It's something that a lot of people dream of, but it takes a while to get there. And sometimes, if you don't line up your cards, you might run out of cash, you might run out of time. Someone else could come in the market and solve the problem instead of you. It's not a sure thing that you're going to get there. But once you get there, you'll know it, and it feels great. And the last part of the equation, which we didn't talk about so far on purpose, is called funding. Now, funding your startup is a very interesting topic. It's a big, broad topic. Again, probably worth a couple videos in itself. But funding is something which you need to think about very carefully when you're starting out. There's different ways to fund your business. You can either fund it yourself, you can fund it through friends and family, meaning you can fundraise from friends and family, or you can also use either VC funding or any other type of external funding that you can find. My personal preference for funding a software product company is actually to fund it in a way which basically means that it pays for itself. It's called bootstrapping, which means you bootstrap your company. And what that entails is you don't fund it externally. You start with the company, start generating cash from the very beginning, and basically the company funds itself. Another way to do it, which people also call bootstrapping, is you could have a different venture and you use the funds from that venture to fund your product company. Either way, thinking about funding is a crucial part into making your software company successful, especially when it comes to product companies, which normally don't generate a lot of cash flow in the beginning. It's very important to stay lean, not to spend a lot of money, and not look for big funding rounds when you're starting out. At least that's my point of view into how to do it right. A lot of founders, they look at the big headlines, they look at the big funding rounds that other companies are gathering, and they start, thinking about the fact that maybe this is very important. And I'm here to tell you that it's not. A lot of companies are self-funded, a lot of companies are bootstrapped, and a lot of the companies that you want to be a founder of are not funded with external funding. Having external funding has its benefits, but it also has its downsides as well. You need to not only please your customers, your employees, but then you also have another set of people that you need to please, which are your investors. And this could actually be the thing that breaks your company very early on. So don't go looking for funding, don't go down that route unless it's necessary. In a separate video, like I said, we're going to be talking about the cases when it's necessary, but just think about you need funding only when you actually need funding. Don't go for the funding just because, everybody else is doing it, or just because you think it's fun to get a check for a couple $100,000 or a couple million US. That's not the point. The point is to have enough runway so that you can get to product market fit. That's the whole reason why funding exists. But more on that topic in a later video. Okay, so with that, we covered all the steps that you need to follow in order to start a successful product company, a software product company. Now, the next thing that we're going to be talking about is how to start a service company. Now, I'm actually experienced in doing both. So I initially started out as a software product company founder, like I said, all the way back in 2015. And then I slowly rolled into building a software service business. And I'm actually now doing both. So I feel qualified to talk about both. But first, how to start getting into software services and what you need in order to start. Usually, software services companies are started by, again, developers or people that have, in one way or another, worked in another software company before that. Very often, actually, software services company founders are people that worked as employees in product companies. Sometimes some of them, of course, have worked in other service companies as well. Now, what's the difference, again, between a service company and a product company? The main difference is the fact that the service company does not have its own products. It provides software development services for other individuals, for other businesses, for other companies. This means someone that wants to build any type of software reaches out to you and you build the software for them. This is the service that you're providing. But before you get into that, before you start, you need to think about what kind of services you want to provide, because software and software development is a huge field. So there's many different things that you can do when it comes to software services. Build mobile apps like the one of the businesses that I own, you can build web applications, you can build websites, you can be a consultant, meaning people that are trying to solve a specific problem come to you and you help them solve the problem. This doesn't mean that you solve it for them, you consult them how to do it themselves. So there's many different aspects of software development that you can provide a service in. I reckon the best thing to get into is the type of service that you understand the best. And like I said, I got into mobile app development initially. And then later on, I started providing mobile app development services for other businesses. So it was a very natural progression. I already knew how to build the software. This was basically the only thing I knew back then. I didn't know how to build a successful business software product, but at least I knew how to build the product, make it functional, make it look good, make it easy to use, make it scalable. So this was where my expertise was in. So that was the most natural thing for me. And I would say if you're a software developer already or some kind of technical founder, it's best to look at the things that you understand. For example, if your background is in mobile app development and you try to get into, I don't know, AI model development, maybe the learning curve is going to be too steep for you initially. And the services that you can provide are not going to be as good as other types of services which are closer to your expertise. And this is the first step in getting into software services development or software development services. And it is figuring out the idea. Very similar to the first step in starting a software product company, you need to figure out what problem you're going to solve, what types of services you're going to provide for your customers. The second step in the process of starting a software services company is figuring out what you're going to offer. First of all, like we said, you decide what services you're going to provide. This is your idea. This is the problem that you're going to solve. Then you need to package your services into an offer. And what I mean by that is not a piece of paper or a PDF or presentation. This is part of it. But you need to figure out exactly how you're going to provide this service. So you need to decide, are you going to be, let's say, full service delivery agency, meaning someone comes to you with an idea and you basically deliver them a finished product that you can then deploy, support later, provide other services for that as well. Or you're going to only take one part of the process. Let's say you only do software development. You don't do design, you don't do delivery, meaning deployment. You just do the software development. This is also possible and very viable. I think it's a little bit harder to differentiate with an offer like this, but it's still an option. What we do in our company is we provide a full service. As I just mentioned, someone comes to us with an idea, and the end of our service is an app in the App Store and the Google Play Store. So you need to decide what your offer is. And a very important part of the offer that you're going to sell to your customers is the price. Now, why I want to talk about the price is because it's something that a lot of people, I think, get wrong in the beginning. You can always change your offer, add more things to it, remove things from it. So you can change your offer at any time. The one thing which is very difficult to change is your pricing. So if you start by pricing your project very low, it's very hard to raise your prices later, especially for customers that you're already working with. So imagine someone comes to you, they want to build a project with you, and you give them a price. It's usually the way projects are priced in software development is based on an hourly rate. This hourly rate is a function of what you're going to pay to your developer or what you pay yourself if it's just you in the beginning, but it's always a function of the salary of that person. So the hourly rates are very different depending on the country where you're from, which to some extent is a little bit weird because we're all competing on the same global market. especially if the services that you provide are not local. Much like what we do, we don't provide services for our local market, we provide services for the global market. Usually we try to sell to companies in the United States and some of the more developed countries in Europe. And therefore, our prices are slightly lower because of the country where we are right now. And you need to be aware that there's some expectation to the pricing that you're going to provide based on the country where you're from. Now, with that to the side, going back to the thought that you need to think about your pricing at a very early stage, meaning don't put prices too low because it's very difficult to actually raise your prices later, especially for customers that are already in your pipeline, people that you're already working with. Them, it's very hard to raise prices. So think about a price that you can keep for at least 2, 3, 4 years in the future if you're serious about your software services company. Okay, so you have your idea, meaning what services you're going to provide. You've packaged everything in an offer, meaning you're ready to start offering your services to clients. So the next step, of course, is to find those clients and start reaching out to them. Now, this is probably the hardest process in the beginning. You're going to have a lot of people not trusting you, and why should they? If you don't have a portfolio, you're just a person telling a story. There's not much to back up your claims. The fact that you can build a good product, the fact that you can provide a good service, this is something that they don't have a reason to believe in. So just be aware of that in the beginning. It might be difficult to get your first customer. And I know this is very different compared to some of the other materials that you can find online, which say that once you're ready to start offering services, the easiest thing to do is to find customers because there's so many out there. That's true, but maybe it's true mostly for services that are slightly cheaper. A software development project can start anywhere from $5,000 and can reach, I don't know, some of the projects that we work on are $100,000, $150,000 for a project. And this is a big price. So it's very difficult to ask for those big prices initially. And if you don't have a portfolio, it might be hard to do. I'm not saying it's impossible. Basically, every service company out there starts more or less in a similar way. But just be aware that in the beginning, it might be difficult. Don't be tempted to work for cheap. Again, I'm mentioning this again because a lot of people make that mistake when they're starting out. One of the main objections that they get from people that they reach out to is your prices are too high, I don't have enough budget and things like that. So they're tempted to work for cheap. I wouldn't do it if I were you. And I know it sounds counterintuitive. A lot of agency owners, a lot of software services company owners out there would prefer to work for cheap initially and raise prices later. Unfortunately, this sets the bar very low for the people that work for you. So it's extremely hard to change that dynamic later. Starting out with inexpensive labor, working on cheap projects, is just not a great thing to do. It's not fun, it's not exciting, and I wouldn't recommend it. Reaching out to customers is similar to what you would do in any other type of business. You can look for potential leads online. You can look at different software solutions that help you find leads, prospect leads. You can go to events, conferences, and other similar situations where you end up with a bunch of potential leads in one place. However, this in itself is a big topic. I think there's enough good material out there, especially on that topic. Customer outreach, I don't think it makes sense to go into too much detail. You need to find the customer that's right for you, identify the customer that's right for you, then start finding them, reaching out to them, and eventually you'll get a client. And hopefully by the time you get your first client, you've already figured out the next part, which is how you're going to deliver your services. There's many different ways to look at this. Most founders of service companies much like myself, start by providing the services themselves. I started out by providing software development services to other businesses by myself. I was the person designing the apps, I was the person writing the code, I was the person deploying the code, I was the person publishing the apps to the App Store. It was basically just me. I was just a one-man show. And I think a lot of services founders start in a similar way. However, it's also a very viable option to start by outsourcing. And I know it sounds maybe a little bit counterintuitive. So you are like the outsourcing company and then you outsource to someone else. But I don't mean it in this way. What I mean is actually finding contractors is the easiest way to start. Now, pool of people that are willing to work as contractors is maybe smaller compared to the pool of people that are willing to work on a normal employment contract. But nonetheless, you can still find great people on the market that are willing to work as contractors on a project basis. And that's the best way to start, because unless you have a pipeline of projects that's 6, 12, 18 months long, it's very hard to predict the future. And if you end up hiring 2, 3, 4, 5 people, it's unclear what they're going to do after they're finished with the first project. So service delivery is the next most important thing you need to figure out. My suggestion is to solve it by working with contractors. Don't hire, or at least wait with the hiring for as long as possible, because it just creates pressure. It creates overhead. You have to pay those people salaries. They have expectations. So it might end up being very sour for you if you start out with a big team initially. A lot of service company founders that I know of started out with one project, one client. They hired a bunch of people and they ended up losing both the clients, the people, and their business because they made that same mistake. To be honest, I was in a very similar position. I almost lost my company because I was working with one client. I hired about 15 people for that one single client, and I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have other clients. So if I were in that position and I didn't have that big team to worry about and take care of, my life would have been much easier. And once the client stopped paying us, basically, I could have said, everybody, guys, this is it, goodbye. But because I had spent so much time building that team, I was holding onto it for way too long until I basically ran out of money. Okay, and now we get to the exciting part. So you have your idea, you know how to deliver your services, you have a way to find customers, you have a way to service your customers, and now's the time to think about scaling. And this is the next step where so many other software services company founders actually end up being stuck. They are in the same position for years. They can't figure out how to get to the next step because they need to take a risk hiring more people. They need to take a risk with finding out new ways to reach out to customers, finding out new sales tactics, hiring a sales team, thinking about marketing. So at this point, your company starts to actually look like a real business with different areas in the business, with different executives for different parts of the business. And of course, this is the scary part. This is the part where you need to let go of the control. You need to hire managers. You need to hire the right people so that you can get to the next level. With scaling of a software services company, there's two main points that you need to think about. You need to scale the delivery, meaning you need to find more resources, find more developers, designers, test engineers, and every other piece of the puzzle that you need. And you also need more customers. So you need a steady flow of new people coming in both directions, meaning people that work for you and people that you work for. And it's both scary and exciting to be in that position. I'm in that position for the past couple of years. I have started hiring for some of the more important positions. And as it looks like, almost 2 years later, I maybe already have hired the first batch of people. I feel like I'm ready to take the next step and really get detached from the operational side of the business and start thinking about growing the business further and scaling the business further, both the delivery and the customer acquisition side. And with that, we have concluded the second part of this video, which is how to start a software services company. So in conclusion, we talked about the different aspects of starting a software company in 2024. We talked about the positive and the negative sides of both types of companies that you can start. We talked about how to start each type of company, and we're now ready with this topic. Being in software development can be very exciting, can be a lot of fun. You can also make a lot of money in software. It's not unlikely that some of the product companies out there are making 80-85% profit margins. Service companies sometimes make 30-40% profit margins. My company is almost at 30% profit margins, which is a big number. Not a lot of legal businesses out there that can generate those types of profit margins in 2024. If you've already made it that far into the video, congratulations. I hope the topic is interesting. I hope it's been of value to you. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is only the first episode and hopefully a long stream of videos along the same topic. So if you find it interesting, if you find it valuable, make sure you subscribe, make sure you share it with someone else who might find it interesting, and see you in the next episode.